Retro Games fans, this is Andy C from Piece of 8-Bit. Welcome to this week's video. Now, if you watched my bit between on Wednesday, and you'll be forgiven for not watching it because not many people have, don't worry, I don't take it personally. And that's partly because a lot of people hadn't even heard of the game, so it probably wasn't on their search criteria. But basically, what I did was I looked at a game called Road Redemption. Now, Road Redemption is essentially a modern love letter, if you like, to the original Road Rash series on the 16 and 32-bit consoles back in the day. A really classic motorbike combat game that, for the most part, for many years, has not seen any kind of new versions or reboots or anything else like that. So I wanted to go and have a look at it. I went and I basically found it because I was looking to compare the 32-bit and 16-bit versions of Road Rash and stumbled upon this game. So I'm going to have a look at this and see what I think. Now, it wasn't universally amazing. It was a little bit repetitive. Go and watch my video. I'll tell you all about it. But it got me thinking, are there any other games that I really enjoyed back in the day that, with their modern versions, are their modern versions better or worse? So I thought of 4 of my favourite games from way back when, and we'll get into those in a moment and review whether I think their modern versions, their reboots, are better than the original versions. And it's also sort of a bit of a follow-on from a video that I did as part of a video response from about 18 months ago from Retro Import Gamer, and James asked which is better, retro or new, and it was quite a general topic. So this is a little bit more specific around certain games. Now, if you're a YouTuber out there, or if you just fancy starting and popping up a response to this, or popping something in the comments to let me know your thoughts on some original versus reboot games, please do so. I would love to hear your thoughts. Just tag me in so I can drop a comment and go and watch your video if you do a video response. So without any further ado, let's dive into my first pick of a game that, had a bit of a reboot. One of my absolute favourites. Let's start with that. I'll see you in there. Right, so first on my list is one of my favourite games from the early 2000s. When I first saw the PlayStation 2, one of the first games that I saw was the original SSX on there. Snowboarding fun, pure chaos, fantastic pick up and play game, loads of character, great music, all of those good things. And we saw 3 really good versions of SSX. The original one, the original SSX, obviously, SSX Tricky, and then of course SSX 3. Now, Tour was not an SSX game I particularly enjoyed, although I like the fact that I could take it on my PSP. So it was okay. But what we're going to be talking about is specifically SSX 3. I think that was the pinnacle of SSX. Some might argue it's Tricky, and don't get me wrong, I loved Tricky as well. It is definitely a toss-up between the two. But I think 3 was when it was at its absolute peak, excusing the pun, of course. And then in 2012, we saw a reboot, which was just simply called SSX. Now, when that game came out, I was so excited for it because it had been a long time. So the original SSX came out in 2001. SSX 3 came out in 2003, and then we had SSX on tour in 2004. So really, we hadn't had, at this point, an SSX game for 8 years. And I was very excited to see this come to what was at the time the next generation of consoles. It was long overdue and I was super excited for it. But what we got, well, it was a shame. All the character was gone. It's not a terrible game. It's not a terrible game in its own right. And if it was the first SSX game that had ever come out, I think we might have looked on it a little bit more fondly. But for me, it had lost so much of that original character. It had lost so much of that original chaos, that arcade pick up and play feel to it. There's a really long intro to the game where you've got to learn all the tricks. And it was quite complicated. Like, all the different tricks you could do was so complex. You know, you had to use the right and the left stick and all the buttons and everything else. Just made it quite difficult to remember all the different tricks that you could do. So as a result, I think we got a game that was really quite disappointing from the highs of the original SSX, the original 4 SSX games, but certainly the original trilogy of games. We had the rebooted SSX. I was very disappointed in it, and this is the first example of where new, well, in this particular instance, the retro The retro game has it, the older game has it, the new game, the reboot, just not for me. Yeah, just not what I was looking for. All right, so there you go. That's SSX, and we've given. I just want to say before we move on as well, I've given SSX a little bit of a battering just lately because we also looked at this on the GBA and we looked at the ports of SSX on the GBA, which were absolutely dire. But don't get me wrong. Do not misunderstand me. I think and the reason why I've looked at this game so much is because I love the SSX series so much. Those original 3 games are some of my favourite arcade style races in that, and some of my favourite games in the PS2 era as well. You know, that sort of generation of consoles. So yeah, we've looked at SSX a lot just lately, but yeah, for me, it's the original series. Rather than the hot freshness of the 2012 version. Let's move on to my next pick. Okay, so next up is another favourite of mine from the 90s. So we're looking at the original Tomb Raider 2 on the screen at the moment. A game I looked at a little bit of a while ago in my review. So what we're going to be doing is comparing the original Tomb Raider series, so 1, 2 and 3, to the more modern 2013 onwards versions of Tomb Raider, because Tomb Raider actually had a bit of a reboot in the early 2000s as well. We had another trilogy of Tomb Raider games from about 2006, but what I want to do is look at the original one and the very new one. Those two series really do stand quite differently to each other, and it's really hard because the original one was an incredibly challenging game. There was lots of puzzles to solve. It was very, very, very challenging and required a lot of dexterity to play, and I found it very, very difficult, especially the second one, which was my favourite of the original 3 games. It was really, really hard to complete, and yeah, it was all about kind of exploration, good plots, all of those kind of things. The newer series, much more action driven, and I think Lara in the newest series is a more believable character, I think. She looks a bit more like a normal person when you look compared to the 90s sprites as well, which is fair enough. I mean, there's a lot of years that have gone on in between those game series. But I think it feels more cinematic, it feels more action-driven. A lot of similarities with games like Uncharted and things like that, a lot of similarities there. So for me, this is a really tricky one because it's very difficult to compare the two eras of this game, because actually I think they are very, very different indeed. And I think I could probably safely say that it's a bit of a tie here, because I think if I want to go and play Tomb Raider, it really depends on what sort of Tomb Raider game I want to play. If I want an action adventure cinematic game, I'm going to play the more modern ones. If I want that sort of exploration, more puzzle solving one, then I'm going to go and play the older ones. To be honest with you, the newer ones require a bit less patience than the original ones, which could be incredibly frustrating to play at times. You were saving the game constantly because it was really, really hard. It was so easy to get it wrong. So this particular round, game number 2, is a tie for me because I think it's very, very difficult to compare these two games. Let's have a look at my third pick in my list. I'll see you there. Okay, so number 3 in my list is a game that I absolutely love and I've sunk hours and hours and hours into over the years. And it's a bit of a woeful tale, which we'll cover in a moment. But this is, of course, SimCity, and it's the game that we're going to be comparing it against actually isn't SimCity. You've probably already worked that out. But the original SimCity launched way back in the 1980s from Maxis, and the original SimCity was basically a genre-defining game. Nothing had been seen like this before. Now, I don't love all of these sorts of sim games. I don't really like The Sims, and things like Roller Coaster Tycoon, things like that. They don't really grab me as much. The only other game that I've probably played a lot of is Theme Park. But other than that, I haven't really got into a lot of these sorts of games, but I loved SimCity. Played SimCity loads. When 2000 came out, I played that even more. I really, really love SimCity 2000 because it took that original model and gave you so much more flexibility over what you could do around your zoning, and the fact that there was, you know, it was now a three-dimensional map, and all of those kind of things was really, really cool. 3000 again built on that a little bit further, improved graphics and skyscrapers and landmarks and things like that, which I just found fantastic. Really, really enjoyed all of those sorts of things, and I enjoyed it all the way up to SimCity 4. I had SimCity 4, played that, it was quite a long time ago now, probably about over 20 years ago. Really enjoyed SimCity 4, and then disaster happened and we had SimCity. So that is not the reboot, however. So Maxis kind of at this point were just not really in it. It didn't really exist as an entity. They were really just EA, and the rebooted SimCity was an utter disaster. There were so many problems with it. You had to be online to play it. The maps were smaller. It felt like a real step backwards from SimCity 4 even. So yeah, if we were to compare the original SimCity or 2000 to a rebooted SimCity, then yeah, 100%, all of the original SimCities win hands down to the rebooted SimCity. However, the story doesn't quite end there, because waiting in the wings was a little company called Paradox, and they created a game called Cities Skylines. Now, for me, Cities Skylines is exactly what SimCity was supposed to have been when it rebooted. It brought deep level simulation. Traffic management was really, really clever. Lots of really clever AI. It really embraced the mod community, the modder community, so you could, you know, bring lots of new buildings, lots of new tools into the game, manage your traffic much better, and it had everything. The maps were fantastic and beautiful, the buildings were beautiful, you could get all the way down to street level. It basically did everything that I wanted all of the SimCities before it to do. And so for me, and bearing in mind as well, the original City Skylines is actually was 10 years old last year, which is incredible, absolutely incredible, and it's still got a huge following. City Skylines 2 was not so well received, had a few issues, but I think it's still a really, really good game. It just needed a bit of work, I think is the long and short of it. And the original City Skylines continues to be supported. There's been additional expansion packs for it, you know, quite recently. So yes, SimCity versus City Skylines is where we're gonna rack this up. Now, if you look at SimCity as a game from an impact point of view, then it is unbeatable. It's had a huge influence on the Sim style of game. But for me, the game that I've spent the most hours in, the game that I've really enjoyed, and although SimCity set the scene and said this is how city simulation is going to be, and that creative side of it, for me, City Skylines is a clear winner, because it's the evolution of a genre that I absolutely love, and it does it so well. And whenever I was playing SimCity, the sorts of things that I wanted to be able to do, which were limited largely by the technology, to be fair, were achieved in City Skylines. So for me, City Skylines is the hands down winner here. But an absolutely key point is that without any of the original SimCity or SimCity 2000, anything like that, we would never even had City Skylines. So big shout out to the original genre, but for me, new is best in this particular round. Let's move on to my final pick. Now, I just want to point out as I go into this, I hadn't really thought about, I purposely didn't decide what my answer would be about which was best, and I didn't pick the games on purpose. I just picked 4 of my favourite games, almost out of the hat. I mean, there's so many games I could have picked, and when we get to the final thoughts part, I'll talk about some of the other games that didn't make the cut and the reasons why I picked these 4. But this 4th game is, again, another one of my absolute favourites, and another game that we have also talked about recently on the GBA, but also on the N64, and that is Mario Kart. Now, for Mario Kart, what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the original Super Mario Kart to the modern Mario Kart that we see on the Switch. Now, I'm not going for Mario Kart World. Not everybody's seen or played that. And I will just talk about Mario Kart World in a moment. But what I'm going to talk about is Mario Kart 8, because I think that is the pinnacle of Mario Kart, and probably already given the game away a little bit there. So, similarly to the SimCity thing, Mario Kart was a genre-defining game. When it appeared on the Super Nintendo, it was a game changer. Excusing a pun again. It was a game changer. It was a fantastic game. It was so accessible. It was so interesting and new, and we'd not really seen anything like it before. Now, the reason I've picked Super Mario Kart and not picked Mario Kart 64 or 7 or Mario Kart Wii or any of those others in between is that I think Super Mario Kart on the SNES, and to a greater lesser extent Super Circuit on the GBA, are quite different to all of the rest of the Mario Karts. So if you look at Mario Kart 8, there's a lot more DNA, in my opinion, in Mario Kart 64, in Double Dash. That sort of 3D genre of gaming means that I think there's just been an evolution of Mario Kart, really since Mario Kart 64. I think it's just evolved as the technology's evolved. So the gameplay and the style of it, I think, are very similar. And as a result, I think when we get to 8, I think that is where it reaches its peak. So that's why I'm comparing 8 to the original Super Mario Kart. A lot of context there. but yes. So the original Mario Kart, again, like I said, genre defining. It's a fantastic game on the SNES, but it is quite difficult to play nowadays. It's graphically quite. It doesn't look too good anymore. It is still fabulous to play, but it is quite hard. It's quite a different style, and we saw this when we played Super Circuit as well. Super Circuit is very, very similar to the original Super Mario Kart, despite the fact that Mario Kart 64 had already been out on the N64 before then. And it is very, very challenging. It's a much harder game to play. So again, if you look at Mario Kart 8 and you look at the original Mario Kart, there's quite a big difference in terms of the style of game and how you play them. And I think a lot of that's down to the 2D versus 3D nature of the games. But for me, again, and I hate to say it, but I think new wins. When you look at Super Mario Kart 8 as the absolute pinnacle of Super Mario Kart, it is fabulous. It looks amazing. There's so many tracks you can play. It's so accessible. The controls just make so much more sense. On the original Super Mario Kart, I find the controls tricky. Even though there's less buttons to press, I still find it a little bit tricky and a bit harder to kind of get to grips with. So, whilst I absolutely love 16-bit Mario Kart on the SNES, for me, Mario Kart 8 on the Switch is absolutely where it's at. Now, I mentioned Super Mario Kart World. I like Super Mario Kart World. A lot of people don't like Super Mario Kart World. I think Mario Kart 8 is better because it has that DNA, the way that the cups and the tracks are structured and all that kind of thing. I just really like that. It's a very pure gaming experience. I think World has tried to be a little bit too clever. I think it's tried to do a little bit too much. I don't like the fact that when you play like a tournament, you have to go to the next track and that's another race in itself. I think they're missing the fact that they can't then have the original tracks in there. I think that's one of the things I've always loved about Mario Kart is there's lots of tracks that are just kind of repainted and then bought into the latest one. So you get an increasing amount of tracks every time you would get a new version. So Mario Kart World's kind of done away with a lot of that, which means I don't love it as much. Now, no, I'm not going to. I was going to say, should I do a comparison to Super Mario Kart? I'm not going to, because I don't want to. This was all about Mario Kart 8 versus Super Mario Kart, and for me, Mario Kart 8 is the best Mario Kart there has ever been. And yeah, please don't shoot me if you don't agree with that message. Let me know your thoughts on that. So there you go. That is Mario Kart's comparison, old versus new. I think new has it this time. So those are my 4 picks. Let's go to my final thoughts, and I'll just talk about a few that didn't quite make my cut. I'll talk about why I picked those games, and then we'll wrap it up for today. I'll see you in there. Okay, well, hope you found that interesting. I'm just going to talk a couple of honourable mentions that I did consider including. The first was Resident Evil 2. which is a game that I know a lot of people love the reboot. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not a massive... It's not that I'm not a massive fan of Resident Evil. It's just not a game that I've played a lot of. I've not really ever got into Resident Evil loads and loads and loads. And so I didn't really feel like I was qualified to talk about Resident Evil 2, and so I haven't. But I know that was definitely on my shortlist of games I wanted to include. And the other game, for the same reasons, and if you saw my video from a little while back about Pokemon on the GBA, then that's another one. And we see a lot of reboots from generation to generation, but thinking specifically Fire Red and Leaf Green versus the original Game Boy versions as well. Again, I just don't know enough about them to know whether I think the modern versions, I say the modern versions, the rebooted versions on the GBA, still over 20 years ago, whether they're better than the original Game Boy versions. I suspect probably that they are. They're on a colour screen, it's a bigger screen, all of those kind of things, but I just don't feel qualified enough to give an opinion on that. And the only other one that did spring to mind, wasn't really on my shortlist, but I did think about it, was also the Final Fantasy series, which is... So many of those games have been rebooted so many times. And again, Final Fantasy is just not something that I've ever really gotten into. I've played bits of it here and there, but I've just never really got into it. So I couldn't comment, in all good honesty, in all good faith, to you about which I think is better. So those are my sort of few honourable mentions there. And the reason I picked these 4 games is, for me, these are 4 of my absolute favourite series of games. I've loved them. I've played them for years, and yeah, they're games that I can always go back and revisit in one way or another. And that's the originals, and obviously, with the exception of SSX, also the newer versions or the reboots as well. So yes, there you go. And obviously, those are just 4 picks from my side. As I mentioned before, I'd love for anybody to do a VR and pick 4 or 5 or however many games they want themselves, and just think about where a game has been rebooted and which they actually prefer. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments as well. Are there some games that you think, I really enjoyed that back in the day, and then it was rebooted and I either loved it or I hated it? Let me know in the comments. Let me know your thoughts. So there you go. That is it for this week. Hope you enjoyed that. Very much an opinion piece. Obviously, there are no right and wrong answers here. Please don't shoot me if you don't agree with my choices. I would just love to hear your thoughts. So there you go. That is that for this week. So coming up in the channel, again this week, not much to announce really, because we're not month withing this month. I am obviously, I mentioned before, living with the VCR for this month. It's not really a proper month with. So I've been watching a couple of movies on that, and I will talk to you about what that's been like at some point. It's been interesting, we should put it that way. Been some things that I'd forgotten about, so it's just going to be a bit of a reminisce really about what life was like in the 90s before we had DVDs and digital TV and Netflix and all of those kind of things. But yeah, it's been quite interesting, I have to say, going back and revisiting, and some good memories, some not so good memories. And then of course we will be having probably another opinion piece next week, whilst we're working our way through May. And of course there will be a bit between on Wednesday as well. Game to be decided. I haven't figured that bit out yet, so we'll get to it. So not very good now next, because I don't really know what I'm doing next week. It's unusual, it feels weird, but stick with me anyway, because I'll try and, I'll always try and give you some interesting content. So yeah, please do stick with me. Of course, if you enjoy these videos, please do hit that like and subscribe button. I really do appreciate your support. Thanks ever so much for watching and tuning in. Just leaves me to say, yeah. Please do all take care of yourselves. Until the next time, I'll see you around. Bye for now.